Hi, folks. Harry Frank from Red Giant here, kicking off week 6 after a little break. Took a week off, and now we're back on it. I know at the end of last lesson I said we're going to be jumping on the jungle design, but I realized we were actually skipping one, which was the fire design. That's what I actually want to do this week. There's a lot to be said about studying how to do fire with trap code products, either particular or form. Now, what I want to say from the get-go is that there's really no substitute for fire other than actual fire footage. But a lot of the times, fire footage just doesn't do what you want it to do, or you want it to do very specific things. Now, there are some great simulation programs out there that do smoke and flame simulations, and I want to make clear that Trapcode Particular is a particle system. It's not designed as a smoke simulator or a form or a flame simulator, and the processes that go into the simulations inside those other the smoke simulators and the fire simulators are a bit different. Basically, it's more fluid dynamics rather than the fractal field controls that we've got inside Trapcode Form in particular. That said, we can get pretty close, and I'll leave it up to you to decide where it becomes more realistic and more usable. I'll try to bring it as far as I can and show you the practical applications of doing it in Trapcode Particular or Trapcode Form. So we'll do a lot of we'll do a mix here, actually, of particular and form. We'll dive pretty deeply into Trapcode Form, both layer maps and quick maps. So when it's all said and done, even if you don't like the design of the fire, it's going to be a good lesson in the various mapping techniques. So that said, we'll be taking our Terra logo and setting it on fire. So this should be pretty fun. And let's get started with just some basic concepts on fire and trying to do successful fire in Trapcode Particular or Form. I'm going to work with just a smaller window here, 960 by 540, and I'm going to create a solid for Trapcode. We'll start with Particular. Now, the basic idea with fire, you've got a couple different options. Now, you can go just sort of, kind of fat and billowy and have sort of a quick rendering fire that doesn't necessarily look fairly real, but it can be okay. So let's just do a basic fire like that and show you how I would do this. So I'm going to leave this at a point emitter. We'll just have sort of a little torch or a point that is on fire. And let's let's go to the physics section and get the motion going. So I'm going to use gravity again, like we did with the bubbles. Gravity allows particles to accelerate upward. So when we've got fire, we have some sort of initial motion where it goes away from the source of emission, where the particle is born. So you notice particles are going up, down, left, right, in all different directions because by default they emit uniformly. So I could set this to directional and have them shoot straight up, but I don't necessarily want that. I want them to start kind of moving randomly at first and then start to get pulled up. How much they're going to spread from that initial point is going to be dictated by the velocity. So if I set this to 0, we're just going to have a single column getting pulled upward. So that randomness is going to be defined in this velocity. So let's set this to a fairly low value, not 100, but maybe somewhere down in the 30s, 35 or so. Now, we don't have to worry a whole lot about the motion here. Now, I always say work on the motion first and then get the look of the particle. But there's not a whole lot of fractal field influence or spin or anything like that that we're going to be doing other than this gravity. So we're just about ready to move on to the particle type. So let's jump into the particle section. Let's close all this other stuff up. Just go to the particle section and let's set this to a cloudlet. Let's bring the size up. And we'll set the color to something kind of orangish. I'll set the transfer mode to add. That's a pretty basic fire. Now we can get a little more detailed color control rather than defining the color at birth and have it change over the life of the particle. So we can go in here to our color map, and let's just pull some of these colors out and have it start more towards yellow and then move up towards red towards the end. In fact, we can even add a third color in here to make it a little more white hot at the beginning, and then have them go upward. Now, they are all overlapping. We have 100% opacity, and we're using a add blending mode, or transfer mode, as Peter Norby likes to leave it called. So if this is looking a little bit hot, I probably want to bring the overall opacity down. And I'm going to bring this red down a little bit. I'm going to make this red just a touch more orange, so it's not quite so Bozo the Clown. Let's bring the size up a little bit. Now, at the birth of the particle, we might want it a little bit smaller. So let's go to the size over life. I need to drag that out. I always try to resist dragging my panels out while I'm recording, because if I stop, things can get a little bit inconsistent. So right now they're going to start big and get small. Let's use the flip button to flip that around so they start a little bit smaller and go big. Let's just kind of drag it out like that so they maybe start not so big. Let's also have them fade in. So I'll just use this map right here. Also, they'll fade up and fade down. Let's crank up the size even more, and the size random. Maybe some opacity random. This yellow, I think, is a little bit saturated. So let's push this a little more towards kind of an unsaturated orange. I have a pretty short comp here, actually. Let's make this 10 seconds. Make that out towards the end. So this could be, a very basic fire. Now, it's not exceptionally realistic, but it's also very fast in terms of its render. So this could be sort of a hot exhaust, or that kind of thing. Again, I'm not going to say that this is tremendously realistic, but at the same time, you get a pretty fast render. I could fill this in by adding more particles, and the more particles I add, the closer this opacity is going to get to a very, very low number, because we've got a pretty high number of overlapping particles. Now, this brings up something that I'd like to point out. We have such a low opacity, and we have some opacity random, and we have these particles laying on top of each other using an add blending mode. And what we start to see is a little bit of kind of noise in here. And what we're seeing is a limitation of using an 8 bits per channel rendering of a color space. So if I bump this to, let's say, 16, you're going to really see that smooth out. In fact, you're not going to see much difference between 16 and 32, other than the blending mode starting to behave a little bit more differently and starting to bloom. But 8 can kind of look a little bit dirty. 16 will clean up that dirt, and then 16 will start to bloom out. Or I'm sorry, 32 will start to make the blending mode kind of bloom out a little bit. Now, if you draw out these maps, make sure to go in and tap this smooth button a few times to get rid of those jagged parts. So I see fire like this quite a bit, and it's okay. It's certainly not realistic. So what's the alternative to this? If we want actual detailed fire, well, the other option is to sort of go to the opposite of this. Instead of using these big billowy particles, to use a tremendous amount of small particles. So this can look better, but the downside is that you're going to be dealing with a much greater render time. So let's say I'm going to set this particles per second to something like 100,000 and immediately turn on caps lock, because I don't want to wait for that to render. I'll set the size to, let's say, 1. Okay, let's see what we've got. Now, this is where our fractal field is going to come into play because, yeah, we have a bunch of particles, but they're not really, they don't look very interesting. So let's go to our physics section. Again, let's close all this stuff up. Physics, air, turbulence. And we're going to affect the position with the turbulence field. Again, remember, turbulence is just a fractal field. It's just like fractal noise, two-dimensional fractal noise that you are used to seeing, except that it is a three-dimensional fractal field. Technically four-dimensional because it evolves over time. But let's crank this up. So let's say it affects the particles 100 pixels in any given direction based on the fractal map that it sees. So we're seeing just the start of something that's maybe kind of going to eventually look like fire. We have to really tweak this fractal field. So first thing I would do is go to the fractal scale, which is right here. This is the scale. In form, it's called the F scale, or the fractal scale. And a higher number is going to push the fractal map closer together. It's basically scaling it down. Not exactly sure why we have to increase the scale to make the fractal map smaller, but it's basically increasing the, I don't even want to say the detail of the map because that's more what complexity does. But the scale basically squeezes the fractal map together. So you notice we have the fractal map affecting our particles down here at the bottom, and then they continue to be affected up at the top. We'd like to sort of smooth that out, so we'd like a straighter path at its birth. We can fade in the time of the particle of the turbulence field. So the turbulence field is affecting the particles starting at a half a second after they are born, and it fades it in, and actually it fades it in smoothly, so it eases in that map. If you, for some reason, want it to be linear, I think that's just their due to legacy reasons, but I can push this amount up, and we should see the base of this start to smooth out. Of course, I'm running 100,000 particles, so this will take just a second. Probably going to want this closer to a second to get that smoothing out. Let's put it over 1 second, like 1.2 seconds. I think this what this is pointing out is that our particles are actually moving fairly slow. Let's go to the emitter just for 1 second. I'm going to drop this all the way down to about 1,000. This is a trick that I use to really speed up rendering, so let's crank up particle size. So the long and short of it is that this this method will start to work, but it's going to be tremendously inefficient. And this isn't a method that I often use because, well, like you see, we have to use tremendous amounts of particles, and the setup is a bit cumbersome and time-consuming to wait for the render. So I'm not going to sit here and tweak this all day, but I just wanted to throw you in this direction to show you the shortcomings of using particular in this. And at best, it's still going to look a bit noisy because the particles are all emitted one at a time. So there's no uniformity to them. Now we could use things like grid emitters and all that to get them aligned, but what it's starting to point out is that the kind of look that we want comes from manipulating a body of particles, a large group of particles, rather than individual particles in an emitter. So when you hear that that description, you should be thinking trapcode form, and this is still actually waiting to update the 100,000 particles. I do have these set at 20, yeah, so that's what took so long. So anyway, let's broom this and go to a much more practical method of creating fire. Oh, there we go. So you can start to see where I'm going with this. It's starting to come together a little bit. It does look a little bit noisy, but it can kind of work. Now Now, a common thing that people do to smooth this out is simply to use CC Vector Blur, which works some sort of blurring magic in here. I really don't know exactly what's going on under the hood with CC Vector Blur. I wish I kind of knew, but I really don't. So if we crank up this blur amount, it sort of looks at the luminance channels and blurs more here or there, and there's a number of different options in here to change how this vector map is applied. We have directional centers and all that, so you can get more of a kind of a wispy look with vector blur and Trapcode Particular, which is a way to do it, but again, not exactly the most efficient way. So let's jump to what I think is a much better method, which is using Trapcode Form. Anytime we're working with a body of particles and fractal fields, Trapcode Form is much better suited to this. So we've got our default settings, which has 3 grids of particles. We don't want 3. Let's just set that to 1. So we'll just have 1 sheet of particles in Z. And let's fill this in with a decent number of particles. I'll do 300 by 300 and set the size. Well, let's do an even 500 by 500. In fact, let's set this. No, let's just set this so it's just inside my frame here. Close enough. Okay. So we're dealing with fractal fields. That's really all we've got to work with in terms of recreating fire. And like I said, fire isn't necessarily all fractal field or Perlin noise math. There's other stuff going on in there that makes more realistic fire, but fractal field is what we got to work with in Trapcode Particular. So I'm going to go to displace here and displace these particles with the fractal map. There we go. And we'll squeeze that the fractal field together. Again, so in particular, I mentioned it was just scale. In here, it's called F-scale. They both use higher values to squeeze the fractal scale down. Now, let's add a little bit of color here. So let's go to the particle section, click on the default white, and we'll make this something that looks a little bit more like fire. Okay, now we have kind of a big blob of fire here. And so what we want to do is smooth it out at the bottom. Set this to half. And smooth it out at the bottom, or at least the fractal map. So let's go into quick maps here, go to map number 1. So just the big picture, if I've not addressed maps before, I don't remember if I have or not. So let's talk about layer maps. We can use various types of images to control different functions in Trapcode Form, such as particle opacity or particle size, or perhaps the fractal strength and how much of the fractal is being applied to any given parameter. So the quick maps are contained within the plugin. So quick maps we actually draw with a map right in here. We have actually a drawing tool that we can use and draw an intensity map. So you can see up and down here we have a value, and then we map that over something. That something is what we have to define here. So in the case of this image right here, I want more fractal strength up at the top and less down here at the bottom. So we're dealing with up and down. That's the y-axis. So I'm going to map this over y, and I'm going to apply this map to the fractal strength. And now I just need a varying map here. So I'll start, or I can draw like that, or I can just let's use the default, or I can just pick this preset right here. So so we have more on one side and less on the other. So we are mapping this over from the top. Remember, up here is 0, so 0 starts at the top and then increases downward. So we're starting up here. That's where the top is, the upper left, and down towards the bottom. Let's move this map down just a little bit. Or actually, let's scale the size up like that. So just to do a little review here, or circle back around and use these quick maps again. So now let's say we want this to fade out because we basically have an equal intensity from the bottom to the top. So we have 3 quick maps that are available to us. So let's jump to the second one here. And I'm going to use opacity. So I want these to fade a little bit over the y-axis. And click on here. So we can click on this map right here. And it's going to fade them from the bottom. I don't necessarily want that. I want this to go the other way. So I could draw it like that. Or I could just use this map and click on this button right here to flip the map so that now it's fading out at the top. If it's fading out too much, like I like this overall curve, but I think the value is fading a little too much, I can use the map offset. So I can keep that same overall curve, but push all of the values equally and offset that entire map. This one, basically offsetting the values up and down. There's a lot of deliberation over what this tool was actually called. It was value offset or value, anyway, lots of arguments got into the offset, and that's what we end up with. So those are the quick maps. Now, once we get into other things like layer maps, which we'll do in a second to create this logo on Fire, so we can drive it from the actual logo image, that's where we get into layer maps. Layer maps are external. They're outside of the plugin. So we're looking at other images that are inside our composition. So this isn't really so bad. Again, I'm not going to call it photorealistic, but this is good for many applications, especially if you're using very distant fires. If you're in compositing and you need something, some sort of specific fire, but you don't need a whole lot of detail in it. So that's pretty good. That's another way. Actually, we have one more quick map available to us. So why don't we fade the sides out here? So let's go to opacity and use it in a different axis. So I'm going to use it over the x-axis in map number 3. Use this map right here so it fades it up and then back down. So we've got these feathered edges over here. And again, I could bring that down. I'd like to feather the edges just a little bit more. Other options we've got with the fractal field. See down here, fractal field, fractal sum. I think I described this once before, but basically, we're working with a fractal map that goes from essentially black to white, or we can consider it 0 to 1 or whatever. So right in the middle, 0.5 means that a value of 0.5 means that the particle is not displaced. So if that map at any given point reads that value of gray or 0.5, it doesn't displace. If it goes, the value increases above gray towards white, the particle will move in one direction, and as that fractal field goes towards black, the particle will get pushed in the opposite direction, and that's what this amount is here. So it's right now we're displacing things 100 pixels in either direction. This fractal sum has an option of using the absolute value. So as things move from gray to white or gray to black, move the exact same way. And we sort of have this map that ends up kind of almost doubled up upon itself. And real in terms of the image itself, what it kind of looks like is a bit more of a burning surface of what I've seen with this absolute noise. Also works well with water surfaces. I think I might have talked about that in the water one. So if we flip this on its side, it basically looks like water, which is kind of funny because a lot of these things start to have similar behaviors in nature. So that's the basics on doing form fire, or a little bit on Trapcode particular fire, which I as you can tell, I'm not nuts about using particular to do fire, but it's definitely doable, or at least some simple settings. But I like using form, and we're actually going to use this to set our logo on fire. And this gets a little tricky, not tremendously tricky. Still working at 960 by 540, so I have a lot of these comps already set up, but let me make sure to not skip over anything. But I might revisit some of my completed comps, just so I don't forget what the heck I'm doing. So this is what I'm going to start with. This is my image that I want to set on fire. Now, again, before we go running willy-nilly into working with effects and trying to make something that looks good, let's think about what we want to do. I want to punch that logo out into this shape. I want to be able to control some sort of shape that actually expands beyond this image, because I want flames that come up here and around the image. I want less of it down here at the bottom, more of it up here at the top. And where the letters are, where they're on fire, we would probably have a lot less of that fractal displacement. But outside of the letters, where the flame leaves the letters and sort of moves up into the air and starts to interact with the atmosphere and move all around. So we want more of that fractal map out here and less of that fractal map where the letters are. So we'll have to do a couple different layer maps here to affect that form layer. We want to punch out the image and we want to control the fractal strength. So that gets pretty deep. So first challenge, let's get the alpha channel punched out of the form image. That's easy enough. So let's go to the base form. We're going to work with a box grid. That's just fine. We just want one set of particles in Z. And I'm just going to, did I move this logo? Or no, the logo is actually centered, but we've got this earth over here and all that. So let me just manually move this over here. Now I'm actually going to exclude the earth. I'm bothered by setting the earth on fire, so I don't want to do that. But I am going to include the area of that, just so it's well, I don't have to worry about mismatched sizes. So I'm going to align the form grid to the size of the logo, and the number of particles really isn't going to matter. We can always come back to this. Let's just leave it at 100, so we'll be able to see our fractal strength and all that, but not have a tremendously large render time. So that said, let's jump down to our layer maps. Layer maps are how we apply external images like this logo here to different things in form, like the color or the displacement. That's overall displacement, so moving a particle in X, Y, or Z, not just the fractal strength. Now, before I do this, I want to have a separate composition that's going to control this, because we are going to need to do a little bit of blurring to this so that the image, or where the particles fall, are a little bit outside of this area. So I have to manually do that. So let me just duplicate this logo in here, Command D or Control D, and we'll pre-compose this so we've got our, we can call this alpha map. So we'll be loading the alpha channel from this layer right here. And I'm going to put a little bit of blur on here. So let's go into blur and sharpen, fast blur, and blur that up just a little bit. So now, compared to the original, our map spreads outside of the area of the letters just a touch. So we have that in our comp, but we don't even need it to be visible. It just needs to be in there. So now I can go to Color and Alpha, select this layer that I've defined as my alpha map, and I will map its alpha channel to the form alpha channel, so A to A, that's what that means. Source alpha to form alpha. And thirdly, I need to define two axes to apply this. Again, form is 3D, it's a 3D particle system, and we're mapping a flat 2D image. We're mapping a flat 2D image to the form. So there we go. You can see that we actually need to expand this emitter out. Or the emitter. There is no emitter. Sorry, there's no emitter in Dropcode form. Now, what's going on? Why didn't that first one align properly? Well, as I kind of wasn't really thinking, there is additional space inside this this source alpha map, which I guess I could just do this and maximize the available space that we've got, which is probably not a bad idea to do. And then we get more particles in here. Squeeze the size together so that these things line up. Okay, that's close enough for TV. Now I'm going to add another layer in here. In fact, I probably should move this down just a little bit. Sorry, bear with me. Now, the reason I want to move this down is because I want to add an additional layer right here that is going to use a vertical blur. And I'm going to move this up just a little bit so that this spreads out that way. I'm going to use a mask tool, rectangular mask, so that I don't have it expanding downward. So just crop it like that. And I'm actually going to use a second pass of blur to blur this horizontally just a little bit. And I don't know how much of that, but I just want this to expand upward as well, so that we've got some area up here at the top, so our flames rise above the letters. Okay. Now, as mentioned, we're going to exclude the earth from this, so before I get too far, let's draw a mask out for that. Set that to subtract. Let's just copy and paste that same mask from one to the other. So this is our alpha map. And I could, at this point, go into, not disperse, but fractal field and define the displace. Let's set it to even 100. You notice the size of the fractal field is pretty small compared to what we need, so let's move this fractal scale maybe somewhere in the low 20s. Yeah, let's just leave it at 20 for now. 22. That looks pretty good right there. Okay, but like I said, we don't want it all over the place. We want to have it stuck to the letters just a little bit. So what I want is for this map here to also control the fractal strength. Now, I'm going to save us a little bit of experimentation and trial and error, and just cut to the chase and say that what that fractal map needs to be is actually inverted from this image. So the image should actually be white here and black on the inside, because we want less on the inside and more on the outside. Black is less and white is more. So I need to take this alpha map that I've already made, drop that into another comp, and rename this something like fractal map. Again, what we're going to do with this is control the strength of the fractal field with this map. So where the image is dark, there will be more fractal influence, and where the image is white, there will be less fractal influence. So here, I simply need to go to Channel, Invert. Oh, wait. Actually, I should do it this way. I'm going to make a black solid, put this behind it, create an adjustment layer. So let's just create a solid called Invert, make that an adjustment layer, and now go to Invert and invert the RGB channel. So now we've got white out here, dark on the inside, and I probably need the ability to tweak this a little bit using some curves. So I probably want to do something like this. So now less fractal strength here, more fractal strength out there. So let's drop this in our comp. So turn on fractal map, turn that off, go to form, go to our layer maps, which is right here. Go to fractal strength, layer, fractal map over X, Y. There we go. Now notice those particles get stuck to the letters a lot better. In fact, let's turn off the logo. So you can see the basic letter shape in there. So tweaking this would just be kind of a matter of the initial blur that we've got on the alpha map, which if I bring this down just a little bit, you should see more of those letters, that basic letter shape coming through. There. So that's feeling pretty good. Now, we still have this area down here that is being affected equally. So we have the fractal map being affected less on where the letters are. We have a little bit of area above it, actually more area above it, which is exactly what we want. We also have it sort of dipping below, and that seems a bit unrealistic to me. So we can control that using quick maps. So I'm going to go into our map number 1. I just had this, this has actually been one continuous take so far, and I just had this terrible thought that I wasn't recording. So anyway, I want opacity over Y, and I'm simply going to do like a hard cut like this. So let's just drag this up. Now again, this is that whole layer, so I don't know exactly where that cutoff point is. Let's just keep dragging this over. No, I don't want a hard cut, but that's about where I want it, so I'm just going to draw a little layer like that. Now, also, that fractal strength at the bottom, I want to thin that out just a little bit so we don't have so much of that fractal strength. So let's go to map 2, map this to fractal strength, go to the y-axis, and do the same thing. So let's just cut that out, or just have it kind of dip like that. It's actually looking pretty good. Not so bad for doing this on the fly. Which, by the way, this is, I don't know if this looks easy, but this is always much harder. And, you can sit here and design it and make it look awesome ahead of time. And then actually doing it on the fly while you describe it is actually much, much more difficult. That's why it never actually looks as good. That's why I always have what I call the lesson version and the final version. So anyway, sorry, I'm getting a sidetrack there. So from here, I'm going to fill in the particles in X and Y. And actually, see these little chunks in here, or these lines, these stripes. That's usually indicative of some sort of quick map that is drawn poorly. And go in here. I'm going to hit the smooth button a few times on this. See if that fixes any of that. So I'm just going to hit smooth a few more times. Yeah, it helped a little bit, but not a whole lot. Let's keep filling this in. Probably even 1,000 in. I don't think we need maybe 800. Let's just try 800 by 800. Let's see how that goes. All right. Now it is, it's fire. It is looking a little bit hot. If it's looking too hot, again, remember, by default, Form uses an add blending mode. And what are we in? We are in 16-bit, so it's going to run a little hotter, or be a little more prone to kind of blooming in its colors. So I'm going to bring this overall color down. Now, actually, at this point, we can still go in and go to our color maps, map in Y, and control this color map like so. So if you want kind of a yellow to, other way, yellow to red. Again, I don't like this default yellow, and I don't really like this default red either. These are too saturated. Maybe something like that. So it's a little less down, a little more orange and a little more red up here. Lighter colors indicate a higher temperature, right? So they'll probably be hotter down here and cooler as they rise up. Now, I did a fun little thing with the logo which I'm going to lay on top, which is a classic old school burning effect. There's nothing really too special about this. Let's again cut out the earth. So let's go to noise, fractal noise. So we'll apply our initial texture to this. So let's add kind of a contrasty texture. Let's crank up the fractal noise contrast, and then we're going to animate the evolution. I'm just going to do this with an expression. So Alt or Option click on the stopwatch, times something like 120. We want this to evolve pretty quickly over time. Basically, we want sort of a burning ember kind of look. Now, what I can do is take that map, the black and white map, and remap it. That would be a perfect use for Colorama. Or I could pretend that I should use something like a color map from Red Giant's Image Lounge, but we don't really need to do that. Colorama is just fine. In fact, it's the exact same plugin. So let's go to Output Cycle. So by default, it's using this spectrum. We don't need that, but fortunately for us, there's actually a preset called Fire. Now, what I'm going to do is instead of having this ramp entirely from this white through the orange to the red to the black, I'm going to go in and pull out some of these bottom colors, and right about here, double click on that color, and we'll also make that black. Whoops, that one right there. Pull this in. Yeah, maybe I need a little bit more red. There. And let's do a little bit of glow. Let's wait for that helicopter to pass overhead. There we go. So that's our burning logo, and that is laid in with our fire, and that's actually sitting on top. We probably want it underneath the burning stuff. And what did I do in the original? Burning logo is actually on top using add blending mode. So let's try that. Burning logo on top. Mix that with the burning stuff in the background. Yeah, it looks absolutely nothing like the one that I fixed. I would think, actually, I don't know why I did it that way. I would think that my form would be on top, blending with my logo. And let's go to our particle opacity. Let's drop this way down to maybe 30. And this initial color, let's boost it up just a little bit. Well, there's some filler stuff that's going to happen as well. So let's get that far and see if we need any more tweaking. So let's just add a little background in here so that there's some sort of ambient color behind everything. So I generally just add a solid and fumble around here and look for generate ramp, radial ramp, and set our colors to kind of a orange to black. Darken that a little. Also, I mean, this doesn't really take a whole lot of know-how. I have two lights on either side, so I created two lights and then put them out there. So you don't need me watch me do that. I'll just copy and paste those, and just to have some ambient light to either side of where the camera is, I would use Lux. So I can just go into a trap code, Lux, and it's going to pull the colors in from those lights. In fact, I can go in and crank the intensity of those lights up. So we got a little bit of light coming in from the sides. You know what we don't have is a camera. Should create a camera. That way I can actually center things up. Now notice how things changed as soon as I created a camera. It's probably because my depth of field is on, and yet it is on. The blur level is actually pretty high, 190. So those particles started to blur immediately. I'm going to use my camera to kind of center things up just a little bit. In fact, let's just solo the... Oh, the logo isn't even 3D, so that's not even going to do anything. There we go. See how well things are aligned. Actually, they're aligned fairly well. Now, one thing that's going on that's affecting the color of my logo here is that I have those lights, and I cranked up the intensity. So I probably want to go in here, hit AA, go to my accepts lights, and turn that off so it's not being affected by those two really intense lights on either side. I'm also going to zoom in just a little bit and make this bigger. This fire is still really quite intense. Let's bring this particle opacity down to 10. There we go. I mean, honestly, it's not looking too bad, although, well, the edges are kind of smoldering, I think. So that's cool. So we've got that, and I'm just going to add a couple sort of ember type of floaty things. So I'm going to make two of these. I'm going to call one embers that are more of a depth of field kind of effect. So let's go to trap code particular, and let's solo this, do this real quick. Just want these sort of floating through the scene, so I'll set this to a box emitter that's going to be pretty large. These are just going to be kind of randomly floating, much slower, so let's set that velocity, and much lower particles per second count. And let's set this to orange, and go into blur and sharpen, camera lens blur. This is great in 5.5, which I'm using right now, or in CS6, which is out now. So anyway, I'm just going to kind of crank this up so we get these nice sort of hexagon floaters that kind of should be basically close to the camera, kind of a depth of field effect. And let's duplicate that, and this one will just be our regular embers. And let's remove that lens blur. Now they're going to be in the exact same spot, so if we want to change that, we can just go into the random seed for the emitter and change that to a different setting. Maybe we want to set this to glow sphere and set the size much lower than that 2, but maybe set a size random, and make sure that we're actually fading in and out. I don't think I did that for either of these, so you always want them to fade or at least scale in or out. So let's go to opacity over life, scale it up, scale it down. Lastly, we'll do a little bit of a heat haze effect. So let's go to heat, or like there's a plugin. No, let's just go, we'll create a new solid. We'll use an adjustment layer. So I know there is a quick key for a new adjustment layer, and I never remember. Option Shift Command Y. I usually just hit Command Y and then make it an adjustment layer. It doesn't really matter. So, but what we're going to do is use turbulent displace for this. Let's go to Twist Smoother. Set the size pretty low. Let's say like 12 or so. And in the offset turbulence right here, we want this basically just continuously moving. I find this most easily done with an expression. So I'll use Option Alt, click on the stopwatch, and that's going to create our offset turbulence expression. This will probably be, I don't know if I've done very complicated expressions so far, but this is, well, it's more complicated than just using time times something. So what we're going to do is, just to keep things organized, we'll use a variable. So I'm going to say Y, because this is up and down. It doesn't have to be Y, it could be whatever. It could be apples or chickens or whatever word you want in there that's not being used by expression language. But Y is as good as anything because that's what I want to assign it to. So I'm going to use the letter Y equal to time times something. Let's try 200. Type semicolon. So y is a continuously changing value, but we can't use this because that will error out because we're only defining one value, and we have two values that define this offset. So I can just take the existing value by using the word value. So that is this value right here, 480 and 280, and add to this another value that is what we call an array. An array is a value that contains more than one value. So x and y are two different values. Arrays are always expressed in brackets. So if I say left bracket, 0, because I don't want to add anything to x, I want x to stay the same, and y is going to be that increasing value. So basically what's going to happen is if I select this, you'll see that this offset should be moving. Oh, there it is. So if I nudge, oh, it's actually moving downward because I'm adding. It doesn't really matter. I can set this to minus and it'll move upward, but it's going to be, well, actually, no, I do want it to move upward. So I need to subtract. Remember, because up here is 0, and 0 goes downward to right here to the highest value of the comp. So 0 is up, higher number is down. So if we want this to move upward, I need to subtract, because that's the negative direction up here, not this way. There we go. Looking pretty close to our original. Not as good, but all the concepts are the same. It's just a matter of tweaking, and I think I used a little less displays here. What is my settings in here? 25 and 15, that's pretty close. 25 and 15. And it looks like my source burning logo looked a little bit better before. So I used fractal noise. That's exactly what we did. Oh, you know what? I added a little bit of a ramp in between the fractal noise. I forgot about that. So let's go back to this. So I applied the fractal noise. Yeah, that's pretty straightforward. And then I put a ramp on here that, if I turn this all the way up, basically goes from white to black. And then I blended that in so it's a little darker at the bottom. Not much, but a little. And then I used the same colorama technique. So instead of being like this, it's more like this, a little darker on the bottom, a little lighter on top. And then our glow. There we go. So anyway, that's how to set our logo on fire. This project will obviously be posted for you to download and take a look at. I had a lot of fun doing this. I think this is kind of a cool technique. And then next week, we'll finally jump into the jungle and start doing some fun stuff with that. So until then, we'll see you on the forums.